Tonight, a love story blooms where bitterness once grew. My Enemy is a gentle, stirring journey through rivalry, memory, and the brave choice to forgive. Set in a small American town, two men discover the heart's surprising roads, where the past hurts, and healing asks to be heard. Tonight, too. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps tender stories reach hearts that need gentle hope today. I grew up on a street where the porch lights switched on at dusk like a row of faithful stars, where the same flag flapped over the same mailboxes year after year, and the same neighbors waved from the same lawn chairs every summer night. In our small town, the grocery store still bagged your bread on top and wrapped your meat in paper, and you could find anyone you needed by looking for their truck at the diner. There, over eggs and coffee that tasted like a steady heartbeat, people told their stories. And this, my friends, is mine. When I tell you that it starts with an enemy, I don't mean the kind of enemy who plots in shadows or throws punches behind the baseball fence. I mean the kind of boy who sits 3 rows in front of you in history class and answers before anyone else, who runs faster in gym and reads deeper in English, who lives down the street yet might as well live on the moon. My enemy was a boy named Miles Cooper, and in those days I believed he was the thorn in my side and the grit in every shoe I laced. If you had met us back then, you might have nodded and understood. We were a pair of stubborn stars on a collision path, orbiting the same small sky. He and I stood captain against captain, baseball one season, debate the next, each set of eyes behind us quietly tallying points. He loved to win with a laugh, and I loved to win with a quiet nod, and between us there was a string pulled taut as piano wire. We pushed each other to get better, but neither of us would have admitted we made the other better. That's the way it was. It's funny the way time tucks things away, burying small moments under big ones. Until you're older and you lift a box of old yearbooks, and there it is, the scrawl of a note, a corner of a photo, a trace of a smile you didn't know you saved. When I say I came back home, it wasn't for a reunion or a holiday, though I wish it had been. My mother, a woman who thrummed like a good country song with pantry wisdom and hummingbird gentleness, left us in late autumn, quietly in her sleep, after a summer of frailty that felt like a long goodbye. Grief changes how a road looks. The street where I rode my bike felt too wide. The house of my childhood looked too small. There were notes in her careful hand on the fridge: call the plumber, pick up more cinnamon, love you, like fireflies bottled and haunting. I had left the town years before, chasing a career and taste of anonymity, believing that distance built safety and reinvention. Yet loss is a compass that points you home, and so I came back for a while, to pack a life into boxes and wrap the dishware in yesterday's paper. The first time I saw Miles again, it was under the fluorescent hum of Harper's Market. That store has always been too bright, like a smile that's a shade too big. He was in the produce aisle, standing with his thumbs hooked into his belt loops, choosing peaches with the same calm focus he once used to call pitches. A long, clean line of gray had appeared at his temples, and his shoulders were broader, like the world had asked him to carry more, and he said, "All right, I got it." He looked up. My breath hitched. In that second, I was 17 again. "Jack," he said, like a fact and a question at the same time. I had planned a dozen lines in my mind for a moment like this: self-assured, distant, witty. I'd imagined myself casual, cool as the other side of a pillow. But there's a strange honesty that grief places in your hands. It takes away your knack for pretending. "Miles," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I liked. "Hi." We stood there among the green bells of peppers and the soft fuzz of fruit, two men no longer boys, measuring each other all over again. He smiled, careful, like he was afraid of setting something heavy down too fast. "I heard about your mom," he said. "I'm sorry. Ruth always said she had the kind of kindness that stays." I knew Ruth, his mother, had a kind word for everyone, but I didn't know she had that for mine. The town had a way of holding threads together even if you were miles away. "Thank you," I said, and felt something open and close in my chest. "I'm packing up the house. It's a lot. If you need anything," he began, And I remembered all the ways we used to finish sentences for each other in class by competing to say it first. We both laughed softly as if we had heard the same ghost in the aisle. He cleared his throat. I mean it, he continued. I work afternoons at the station. He pointed toward his shirt. Fire department. He had been a spark even then, and it made sense. Mornings I'm on site with my crew. But I can come by. Lift boxes. Fix a hinge. Whatever you need. I wanted to refuse. Pride has a way of dressing itself up as politeness. I'm all right, I said. Mostly. But thank you. He didn't push me. He just nodded like good men do. The kind who lay out a piece of rope and step back, giving you room to grab hold when you're ready. You know where to find me, he said and turned his cart down the bread aisle. As he did, a kid at the end of the aisle reached too far for a bag of chips, the kind that's always just out of reach. The bags tumbled, a cascade of salt and vinegar, and without breaking stride, Miles caught the shelf with his palm, steadying the avalanche, then ruffled the boy's hair, made a joke, and carried on. Some people don't make a fuss about being good. They just are. The next morning it snowed. In our town, the first good snow never looks worried about itself. It tumbles down merrily and gathers in tidy blankets on the roof lines. This might surprise some people, but I like winter. I like the honesty of it. I like the way sound is swallowed in the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts, the way the world slows down and invites tea and reflection. I was wrapping glassware when the power flickered and went out. The heat kicked off with a final sigh, and the house suddenly remembered how old it was. I pulled on my coat, grabbed a flashlight, and stood at the window watching the flakes thicken like the inside of a snow globe shaken by big hands. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at my door, solid and familiar. When I opened it, the wind rushed in, and there stood Miles, cheeks pink from the cold, hat askew, snow peppering his shoulders like powdered sugar. Power's out on the west side, he said. We're checking on folks. You're working? I asked, and then saw the truck idling by the curb, lights a muted, comforting blink. Always, he said with a small grin. You good on blankets? Heat? He stepped inside when I waved him in and stomped his boots on the mat. Behind him, a second figure appeared, one of his junior volunteers, and waved, then kept on toward the next house. I've got quilts enough for a Vermont inn, I replied. My mother believed in comfort. Smart woman, he said softly, and the house seemed to nod in agreement with the 3 framed photos on the hall table. He moved through the rooms like he remembered them, remembering where the hall closet stuck, where the kitchen floor creaked near the sink. He lifted a corner of the rug, checked a window latch. The way he moved made the house feel seen. Nobody had moved through this space that way since my mother. Grief put a hand on my shoulder again, but it rested lighter this time, as if it knew someone else was there. We found ourselves in the kitchen, the only heat coming from a candle I'd lit in an old jar that smelled like vanilla and a little bit of memory. His eyes landed on the ceramic jar labeled tea. Still have your mom's chamomile? He asked, and I stared. How would you know? I stopped, realizing the men of this town had probably fixed everything in every house at one point or another in Mother's chat. He chuckled. She once shooed me off the porch with a jar of it, he said. Said I looked tired, and no boy who worked with fire should ever pour from an empty cup. He paused. That was the week my dad went in for his heart. She had a way. I warmed water on the small camp stove I kept for emergencies and poured 2 mugs. He held his in both hands and breathed in, giving the same appreciative nod I remembered from high school when he read a sentence he liked. How long are you back? He asked. Until the house is ready, I said. Until I can breathe right again. The honesty spilled out before I could fold it up. He didn't look away. If anything, the space got warmer from the human kindness of being listened to. As the snow thickened, we sat and shared a quilt across our knees and talked about nothing and everything. About Mrs. Harper's habit of singing the wrong lyrics in the store. About how the high school put in new turf. About how Main Street's Christmas lights were already in place, neat as a checkerboard. Somewhere in there, the conversation shifted. He told me that he never left town. He had plans once, he said. Flight school, then maybe the forestry service. But his father got sick, and the town needed hands that knew which wires were which. He stayed and learned to fix things that break and hold things that hurt. He didn't say it like a sacrifice, only like the simplest truth. In return, I told him why I left. How I wanted to be somewhere where my voice felt like it belonged to me, where I could say who I was without needing to explain it 3 ways. I told him about the life I built in the city, a small apartment with a balcony that looked at other small apartments, a job that was mostly email, a few good friends, and a long partnership that ended because we had grown into different versions of ourselves that no longer fit together. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. He didn't ask for details. He didn't look for someone to blame. He simply let sympathy be sympathy. We were not kind to each other, I said, the words finally knocking softly as they asked to be said. Back then, I think about it sometimes. How it felt like I had to beat you to the punch, in class and on the field, or else I was losing something bigger than a game. I heard the rookie embarrassment in my voice and wanted to take it back. He shook his head. "No, Jack," he said with a gentleness that surprised me and did something to me I wasn't prepared for. "We were boys. We were both good. And the town asked us to be better than that, like there was only one spot at the table. They made us sit at the same end and see who could whisper louder to prove a point. We did what boys do. We took the dare." The wind rose, and the old ash tree in the yard squeaked against the house. The kettle on the camp stove rattled softly. He looked down at his hands for a long moment, and then up again with a decision made in his eyes. "There's something I should have said a long time ago," he added. And I didn't say it because I was afraid of it. Afraid of myself, afraid of what would happen. And then at some point it felt much too late. I forgot to breathe. It felt like the air in the room got thinner and richer. "Back then," he said, eyes steady, "it wasn't hate, not the way we thought. I didn't hate you, Jack. Not a pause exactly, but a steadiness gathering itself. I couldn't figure out why I didn't know how to stop watching you. You made everything in a room sharpen, and I didn't have language for it, and I didn't dare look for one, not even with myself. So I competed, I teased. I called it rivalry. It felt safer to have you as my enemy than to admit you were the person who made me feel—" He didn't finish, but something finished inside of me. The room stood very still. It's remarkable the way grief and joy can share a table if you make room. A small smile tugged at my mouth. It felt like a bridge had appeared, old, sturdy, trustworthy. "How funny," I said, voice low, that 2 boys both stood on opposite shorelines waiting for the other to build first. He exhaled, a laugh, but one soaked in years. "What a pair of fools we were," he said kindly. The power came back on in the middle of our second cup of tea. The house sighed and hummed, grateful. Miles stood, stretching his shoulders, and said he had to move on, more doors to knock. He buttoned his coat and stood at the door, then turned back. "I meant what I said yesterday," he added, "about helping. This house—" He looked around at the molding, the wobble of the banister, the old wallpaper with its faded roses. "It deserves to be packed with care. So do you." Over the next weeks, there was a rhythm. Morning boxes, afternoon snow that fell or didn't. Evenings where the lights on Main Street clicked on with the same faithful hum that belonged to the town's heart. And there was Miles, showing up with his toolbox or with coffee and sandwiches from the diner wrapped in wax paper. We worked, side by side, like we had always been meant to do something that required both our hands. We found old keepsakes tucked behind books and laughed at old school programs where our names were printed too large. He fixed the kitchen cabinet that always hung crooked. I found the scarf his mother had knit for mine, soft as a whisper, and he held it to his cheek like a prayer. We grew into something that felt like quiet relief, like exhaling after decades of holding one's breath. There were moments when our hands brushed and my fingertips lit up with the memory of all the touch I had told myself I didn't need from him, all the while wanting it like water. There were moments when he would stand at the window, looking at the yard where 2 boys had once raked leaves like it was a competition, and he would tell me about his father's laugh and his mother's stubbornness and the way the fire station smelled like wet canvas after a call. One night, the town held its annual holiday potluck in the community center, the one with the scuffed floors and the bulletin board covered with church circulars and lost mittens that had become year-round decor. The tables were set up in long rows, with red cloths and pine branches in vases. You learn the shape of a community by what shows up in its dishes. There were casseroles with crunchy topping, pies with top crusts that sagged a little but tasted like home, and deviled eggs lined up in their trays like tidy soldiers. We sat near the back, where the talking was softer. Mrs. Alvarez, who had taught 4th grade for 30 years, pressed 2 plates of cookies into our hands and told us we looked tired in the way only someone who loves you can get away with. I looked around and realized how much I had missed the gentle familiarity of faces that had watched me grow up, even the ones who still forgot what I do in the city and asked like they had never heard the answer before. It was all right. There's a goodness to being known in the simple ways. Halfway through the evening, the community coordinator, a man named Carl, who treats details like children he must shepherd, tapped the microphone. "We've got a little something tonight," he said. "Some of you know that Jack is back for a bit, taking care of his mom's place. His mom never missed a potluck if she could help it. She once brought chicken and dumplings by the gallon and told me a church without dumplings was like a barn without hay. You can stand in it, but you won't feel like staying." The room chuckled. Carl continued. "We'd like to honor her memory by doing what she did best. Take care of people. So if you've got a story about her kindness, come up and share it." One by one, neighbors stood, voices shakier than they meant them to be. Someone told the story of a winter when the pipes froze and my mother brought over a thermos every morning and told them not to thank her, but to thank a woman she remembered who had once brought her soup when I had the flu as a child. Another told how she'd written letters to the editor about keeping the library hours long for the kids after school. Miles didn't speak, but I felt his hand find the back of my chair, his knuckles curving over it softly, like the touch of someone who says, "I'm here." It was a small thing. It meant the world. Afterward, when the chairs were stacked and the lights began to snap off in rows, we walked outside into the brittle, glittering cold. The sky was so clear you could pick out constellations without looking for them. Our breath puffed. He reached for my mittened hand without a word, and I let him. The way you let something happen when your whole life has been pushing against it. We walked down Main Street like 2 halves of a story finally in the same chapter. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had been brave sooner?" I asked. It wasn't a lament. More like curiosity you carry like a coin in your pocket, rubbing it smooth with all the times you turn it. "Sure," he said. And then I think about how maybe we had to learn how to be soft first. Boys want to be loud about everything. Men learn the goodness of quiet. He squeezed my hand. "I hate that you had to hurt to become you. I hate that I had to lie to myself so long. But here we are. Here we were." The holiday lights reflected in the shop windows made our faces look like we were wrapped in something gentle. We stopped in front of the old bookstore, Benson's, where Mr. Benson used to let us sit for hours on the carpet in the back reading everything we could reach. The sign was cracked now. The clerk inside was a teenager in a cardigan, cheeks flushed from the cold, shuffling displays and humming along to whatever holiday song the radio had picked. Miles shaded his eyes with his free hand and looked in like he was peeking at an old friend. "You ever think of staying?" he asked. "Be right here. You always loved this place." It could use someone with love in his hands again. It was the first time anyone had put a gentle finger on a possibility I had not allowed myself to speak, that the city had been good to me, but not kind. That home, for all its complicated past, held a softness that asked nothing to prove itself. It frightened me to want anything that much, and yet it was a sweet kind of fear, like standing on a dock and seeing a lake mist up at dawn, knowing it will be cold at first and then lovely. In January, the storm came. News told us it would be big, and the sky agreed. The snow fell with intention. The wind decided it had something to say. The fire station ran without stopping. Pipes burst in old houses. The big oak by the church dropped a limb like a tired arm. I sat in my mother's living room, wrapped in one of her quilts, and tried not to think about how grief gets louder when the rest of the world does too. When the call came through to the station, Miles's voice clipped and calm in that way that sets panic back down in its seat. It was about the blue house on Birch. The one with the steep gable and the tiny porch. The house where Mrs. Jenkins lived. The woman who had taught half the town piano and the other half how to make lemon bars. She slipped on the back steps trying to knock snow off and broke her wrist. The crew went. Miles went. I watched the truck go by and whispered, "Be safe, the way people do who finally know they can lose what they love." An hour later, my phone rang. It was his friend Eli, breathless and apologetic. "He's all right," he said first, like good men do when they've got hard things to tell. "He slipped off a porch, hit the railing weird. Nothing broken, we think, but he knocked his shoulder good and caught a stitch or two. He'd say he doesn't want anyone to fuss, but I'm on my way," I said before he could finish. The drive to the clinic felt longer than any road I had ever taken, even though I could have walked it if the weather had allowed. Inside, the lights were too bright again, and the way the floor smelled like antiseptic made my heart gallop. When I reached the door to exam room 3, I paused with my hand on the frame, took a breath, and stepped in. He sat on the end of the bed. Sweater cut carefully at the shoulder by someone's efficient scissors. The skin around the stitches clean and angry. His cheeks had a new flush. His eyes found mine immediately and softened. And that was when I understood that the fear of losing someone is another name for love's barking dog. "You look like you wrestled a fence and the fence won," I said, trying for light and slightly missing it. He smiled anyway. "Railings don't like me," he replied. "But we got her to the clinic and her wrist is set. She fussed about not being able to play for the church piano thing and then told me I needed better boots, which is fair." He rolled his eyes. I moved closer, trying not to hover like an anxious cloud. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I breathe," he joked, and then winced because laughing made it worse. I reached out slowly, a hand hovering over the place on his shoulder that was whole. And then, when he nodded, I placed my palm on his good collarbone and let it rest there, offering steadiness as if I could loan him some. "Don't scare me like that," I said, and the tremble in my voice had nothing to do with the cold either of us had brought in with our coats. The room was quiet apart from the clinic clock ticking. That kind of empathetic sound that has no business being comforting and yet is, because it means time is functioning like it should. "I'm sorry," he said softly. His gaze slipped to my mouth and back to my eyes in the careful, almost reverent way that teaches a yes and asks for it too. I forget sometimes that I'm not alone in the world anymore. If there are moments when a song plays and the air hums along, this was one. I leaned in and kissed him. No fireworks, no grand proclamation, just the sweet warmth of two people finding, finally and without performance, that their mouths were meant to learn the contours of one another's quiet. He tasted like peppermint and a little like relief. After that, we let ourselves be in love. I don't know how else to say it. We didn't make it a project. We didn't make a production. We let it arrive and then we let it stay. He learned how I take my coffee, milk first, then pour, so the swirl looks like a weather map. I learned how he orders a burger, no pickles, and he always swaps his fries for onion rings and then steals 2 of your fries anyway. We found a rhythm around the house that would have made my mother laugh with her hands on her hips and approval sitting behind her eyes. We cooked in her kitchen, my kitchen now, with her cast iron, making soups that simmered the afternoon into a kindness and biscuits that rose like applause. I found in myself a steadiness I had been avoiding in the city, a kind of steadiness that comes from putting your hands on wood and soap and warm plates and another person's back when they are washing dishes, and you want to say, "I'm here," without using your voice. Of course, nothing is simple. I won't lie to you and say everyone clapped the second we let the shape of us be public. Small towns can be soft and also slow. Mostly people surprised me. They were less concerned than the big story in my mind told me they would be. A few raised eyebrows at the diner. A couple of those long looks that aren't about you so much as about someone else's idea of what their life should have been. Mrs. Alvarez baked a cake with so much frosting it leaned and said, "About time," and hugged us both until my ribs felt rearranged. There was some quiet, too, those who waited to see if the weather would change before saying much, and that was fine. A life is not built on applause. It is built on showing up. One afternoon, I found a box I hadn't seen before, small and tucked behind the old vacuum in the hall closet. Inside was a stack of letters my mother had written and never sent. Some were to her own mother. Some were to herself. A few were to me. Most I knew to leave alone, like a church with the doors open but no service. But one was addressed to, "For when Jack comes home and the house is quiet." The handwriting was steady, and I could feel her voice lifting toward me from the paper. She wrote about me as if I were a little boy still, how I pushed my hair back when I was unsure, how I sat with my knees up under my chin when I read. She wrote about the day she saw me watch Miles from the school steps, that long early autumn day when the sun is stubborn and the leaves are pretending they don't know what's coming. She wrote, "I saw the way you looked at him. Don't be afraid of things that make the world clearer to your eyes." She wrote, "I hope this town learns to be kinder sooner. But if it doesn't, I trust you will find kindness where you can and let it grow." And then, in a postscript, "I once took him a jar of tea when his father was in the hospital. He looked like a boy trying to be a perpetual motion machine. Remind him that he can rest." I set the letter down and cried the kind of tears that do not empty a person but fill them, that connect yesterday to tomorrow with a ribbon. I showed the letter to Miles that evening. He read it standing by the sink, then folded it back along its old creases and tucked it gently into the box, like a promise. He was quiet a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I wanted to tell you something," he said, "but I needed to know how to say it." He took a breath. "I'm running for city council. Carl's retiring, and the town needs someone who knows what it means to sit at a table and listen without grandstanding. I want to help fix up the old buildings, bring back the bluegrass night at the park, make sure our old folks can get rides to appointments, and that the kids have a safe place after school. I've been thinking I shouldn't because of us. I don't want to drag you through anything, but reading this, I think about your mom, and about how hiding never made me a better man. I think about Ruth, too. She doesn't always remember what day it is anymore, but she remembers that people need looking after. I can't do it by being small." I put the letter down and walked to him. "I won't be dragged," I said, and kissed his temple. "I'll walk beside you." So we did. The weeks that followed were the kind that only small places know. Poster board signs that curled at the edges in the damp. Coffee hours at the library where someone brought cookies in a tin and they tasted like fourth grade. He stood at the back of the room listening to folks say what they cared about, nodding and taking notes in that careful script of his that looks like he carved each letter with a pocket knife. People asked about us, sure. They wanted to know if he was trying to make a point. His answer was gentle and honest every time. "I'm trying to make it easier for everyone to be who they are," he said. "That's always the point." I stood there not as a symbol but as a person who loved him, and in the end, that was all it needed to be. He won by a handful of votes. Enough to be a victory, small enough to be humble. On the night the results came in, the town gathered in the community center once more. There were hugs and cake, and that strange, heavy light that institutional fixtures always cast that somehow looks celebratory when people stand under it with joy. He raised a hand in thanks and shook all the hands that reached for his. Then, when it was quiet enough to hear yourself again, he came over to me as if I were the doorway through which the room made sense. "Dance with me," he said. And we did, slow, though there was no music. Just the sound of old radiators and new laughter. Spring arrived stingily that year, picking and choosing which days to open her hand. The snow retreated in embarrassed little piles. Kids leaned their bikes against the fence outside the convenience store. I started sleeping with the window cracked so I could hear the street, which is to say, so I could hear the world living. One afternoon, I drove to Benson's, the bookstore of my childhood, and found the door open and a handwritten sign that said, "Looking for new hands." The teenager with the cardigan smiled and said the owner had been hoping someone would come along who loved the place, like it could be a person, and not just a shop. I didn't know what to call the feeling that swelled inside me except yes. We painted shelves. We sanded the door and oiled it so it sighed open like a patient old door proud of itself. We put a little table in the window and a pot of geraniums and a jar of lollipops for the kids who came in with their grandparents. We made a section for local authors, and the first time I shelved a copy of a poet who had grown up 2 blocks over and gone on to write about our very sidewalks, I felt the kind of happiness that doesn't make you raise your voice, just makes your shoulders drop in gratitude. On Saturdays, Miles worked the counter while I stocked or helped someone find a book about gardening. And I watched him talk to people with that same soft steadiness that had always been his and felt proud enough to burst quietly. We weren't perfect. No one is. There were days when he came home tired and threw his keys on the table like they were heavier than keys have any business being, and I said the wrong thing because I wanted to fix what couldn't be fixed in that moment. There were days when I woke with my chest tight, grief like a small animal curled there, and he learned it and set his coffee down to sit with me until the little animal calmed. We learned each other's rhythms, the way to say, "Do you want advice or a hug?" before offering either. We apologized when we needed to, and we made dinners on the nights it seemed silly to be fancy and just needed to be fed. We slept with our feet tangled like we had gotten lost and found our way by touching. The town grew used to us, the way towns do. We became part of the wallpaper, which is to say part of the story you don't have to squint to accept. We were no one's cautionary tale. We were a reminder that the heart holds more than one town tells it can. One day, Mrs. Jenkins, wrist healed, came into the bookstore with a bag of sheet music and a firm expression. "I'd like to start a weekly sing-along in the back," she announced. "Do you have a piano?" We did not. 2 days later, the community center loaned us the old upright no one was using, and we rolled it in, and every Wednesday at 6, the bookstore filled with voices. Sometimes we sang the old songs our grandparents taught us. Sometimes we sang a new songwriter who sounded like she had been alive forever. Sometimes we just hummed. At the end of that first spring, I stood on the front steps of the house as the sun hesitated before going down, the kind of evening that makes everything look burnished. The azalea bushes out front had put forth their impossible pinks. The air smelled like cut grass and the sharp, clean scent of a storm that had changed its mind. I thought about the word enemy and how simple it had felt when I was young. Enemy, rival, opponent. I thought about how fear teaches that if someone has what you want, talent, attention, affection, you must push them away to make room for yourself. It took a lifetime to learn that the opposite is true. When you draw someone close, sometimes you make room for both of you to breathe. Miles came up the walk, shirt sleeves rolled, council papers under his arm. He still wore his old watch, the one with the scratched face, because it told time like a friend, and because his father had worn it before him. He climbed the steps and stood in front of me, close enough that I could see how new sun had freckled his nose. He set his papers down and took my hand. "I saw the poster for the library fundraiser," he said. "They're finally going to get that lift chair for folks who can't do the stairs. I told them I'd speak and I hoped you'd read." "Of course," I said. "I'll read anything. Poems about rain, instruction manuals about patience." He smiled and kissed me, a good, sure kiss that didn't ask permission because it had already been given 1,000 times and never taken back. "You know," he said in a tone you use when you're about to say something reckless in a kind way, "we could hang on to this house, if you want. We could fix the back porch for real. Keep your mom's garden. We could live here. Or we could sell it and find something with fewer stairs for Ruth to visit. I'm saying I can see it both ways and both ways are good because you're there." I laughed, startled and filled. "It's a nice problem to have," I replied. And we stood in that American dusk with the sounds of our town leaning in, the dog 2 doors down with opinions, the teenage laughter that is always a little too loud because joy doesn't know how to whisper, the low note of a truck 3 blocks away, and I thought, this is what it means to be home. The day of the library fundraiser came with good weather, like the sky wanted to be helpful. We set up chairs under the maple that remembers everyone who has stood beneath it. The kids made signs with glitter they had to be persuaded not to shake. The older folks brought deck chairs and blankets and the patience of people who have seen enough to know things take time. Miles gave a talk that sounded like him, steady, hopeful, careful with the word we. I read a passage from a book about small mercies, about how kindness is what you do when no one is keeping score. When I looked up, he was watching me from the back row with that expression that says, "I am here and I am proud." And I walked off the little makeshift stage and into his easy, open arms. That night, after the chairs were stacked and the last slice of pie had been eaten by the teenager who always arrives late and hungry, We went home to our kitchen, which smelled like lemon and soap and books. I sat at the table while he made tea, his rhythm a song I know now: open, pour, pause, stir. He set a mug down in front of me and sat across from me, elbows on the table like boys. We didn't talk for a while. There is a kind of quiet that is not empty. It's like a quilt stitched with all the days before it. I sometimes think about the first time I called you my enemy, I said into that soft. I don't remember saying it out loud, but I remember how right it felt. Like a jacket that fits until you realize it's 2 sizes too small and you can't lift your arms to hug anyone. He smiled. I remember the first time I realized I wanted to take your jacket off and hand you something that fit better, he said. And we laughed, which is the kind of grace I wish for everyone at least once a day. My friends in the city came to visit in August, when nights are noisy with crickets and the town feels sleepy in the afternoons. We sat on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea sweating on the table and told stories that belonged to both my pasts. They hugged Miles and told him that any man whose closet contains that many flannel shirts must be a good man. We walked downtown and I introduced him not as my friend, not with a cough into my sleeve, but as who he is to me. The world did not end. The church bell still chimed. Someone's screen door still clapped. We went home and fell asleep with our windows open, the night hours cool and efficient. Time will do what it does. It will move forward whether you haggle with it or not. Ruth's memory will keep being a stubborn visitor. It will show up when it likes and leave without telling anyone. We will keep showing her pictures and telling her jokes and making her tea just the way she taught us, because a person is not only the things they remember, they are also the things remembered by others. The kids who come to the bookstore will grow taller and braver, and someday one of them will kiss someone by the new releases shelf and pretend they don't know there are 2 grown men smiling behind the counter like 14-year-olds. We will fix the back steps. We will argue about paint colors, about whether it's more of an eggshell or a cream, and then we'll laugh because, of course, that's a lovely argument to have, and yes, there will be days when the old habit will try to knock, the one that tells you to armor up, to look for enemies, to move your pieces on the board in the ways you learned to survive. But then, there will be the voice that sounds like love, the one that says, you don't have to do that anymore. You will remember a snow day with 2 mugs of tea, a hand on a chair back, a bridge built by a sentence finally spoken. You will look at the person across the table, the one who once stood on the other side of your life looking like a problem to solve, and you will know, as surely as a flag waves and a porch light waits for dusk, that you were never meant to win against each other. You were meant to win together. Sometimes, when the shop is closed and the night presses its face against the big front window, we sit on the floor between the stacks and read. The little bell over the door makes no sound because there's no one left to come in. We stretch our legs out. His ankle rests against mine. He reads some line that he likes and looks up to see if I notice the way his heart did, and I do every time. The janitor at the community center walks by and waves through the glass and keeps on. The town sleeps like an animal with its head on its paws, content and vigilant. I can hear the faint whir of the old ceiling fan, the one I've been meaning to replace and haven't because its noise has become a pet. Do you ever miss the city? He asks sometimes, not because he's afraid I'm leaving, but because he likes to know what my mind is up to, like someone checking the weather. Sometimes, I say honestly. I miss the anonymity sometimes, the way you can drift if you want. But I don't miss drifting, and when I do, I look at you. And it's like seeing a lighthouse wink on, and suddenly I know exactly what to do. He squeezes my hand. We've both been so many versions of ourselves, he says. I'm glad this is the one where we know how to hold on. If you asked me to list the moments that matter, some would sound small, and maybe to you they would be, and that's okay. The night I heard him humming along to the radio while fixing the hinge on the back door, and I realized he hums when he's content. The morning we left 2 plates in the sink and went to watch the sunrise because coffee can wait, but this can't. The afternoon he left his council binder on the table, and I tucked a note into it that said, with the old teenage swoop I thought I had grown out of, there is no world where I don't choose you. The day I found my high school yearbook and looked at our photos side by side, at our serious faces learning how to want, and I pressed my thumb to the picture and then to his shoulder. Amazed that time can be kind, We once thought we were enemies because that was the word we were given and the frame we were handed. And sometimes you hang a picture just because the wall is empty and it seems like a place a picture should go. But a better frame was waiting. A better word. It took a town and a winter and a box of letters and a storm and a broken railing and a kitchen kiss and 100 small yeses that sound like ordinary life. It took patience and a little luck and the stubborn mercy of people who knock on doors in the cold because power is out and someone might need tea. That's the thing about love in a place like ours. It's not flashy. It's a porch light left on. It's a seat saved at the community hall. It's the words my enemy turned gently into my love by steady hands that know how to repurpose what once seemed broken. I could tell you more, how the lilacs bloom in thick waves that make the whole town smell like a memory you want to climb into, how we drove to the lake and skinny dipped at midnight and laughed like we were 20 and not the ages we are now. How sometimes I still get scared, and he holds my face in his palms and says, "I know," and the fear sits down with us like a neighbor and eats a cookie and then leaves because it got bored of not being in charge. I could tell you how Ruth, on a good day, patted my hand and called me by her own brother's name, and then frowned and said, "That's not right. You're the one with the bookshop," and I said, "Yes, ma'am," and she nodded satisfied. I could tell you how the first hot day of summer turned the bookstore into a beating heart because of all the bodies and the songs, and Mrs. Jenkins' fingers stumbled a little, but no one cared. And the teenager in the cardigan cried quietly at a line, in a poem like it was the first time she had ever been seen, and we all pretended not to notice because we knew she needed that moment to belong only to herself. But really, all you need to know is this. Once upon a time, I thought I had an enemy. He was the boy with quick hands and a quicker grin who dared me to be sharper because I was watching him watching me. It turns out I had a mirror. And mirrors, if you're brave enough to look into them fully, will tell you who you've been avoiding. Yourself, yes. But also the person who walks toward you with a mug of tea and the promise that we is easier to carry than I. When the light fades on Main Street, and the last customer leaves with a paperback stuck under their arm like a secret, we lock up and turn our steps toward home. The sidewalk remembers the days our feet were faster. The steps remember our shoulders carrying boxes and then lighter things like laughter. We climb and we open the door, and the house breathes us in. In the morning, we'll do it again. We'll turn on the porch light because someone might need to know that somewhere a light is always on. We'll make coffee, and we'll read the paper. And we'll plan how to replace the back railing and how to fix up the gazebo in the park because the summer concerts deserve a stage that makes everyone sound like they belong. Tell me something you're looking forward to, he says one night when we are under the quilt. The town's noises settled into their soft hum. Tomorrow, I say, and mean all of it. The eggs from the diner, the phone calls at the shop asking if we have that one book with the blue cover. The council meeting where someone will bring a pie that was supposed to go on a windowsill and ended up here instead, and the walk home with you. He kisses my forehead, then my mouth. And the old clock on the dresser ticks, faithful. Outside, the maple tree shifts, and a car goes by, and the world keeps doing what it does, which is to say, it keeps offering itself to us. We take what we are given. We build with it. We are not enemies of anything now, except maybe the idea that love has only one look. We have learned how to be brave in a way that looks like carrying groceries, and writing letters and choosing the same side of the booth and showing up with a hammer and tea when a storm takes out the power. At the end of everything, when we are old and the town has grown sideways and the bookstore has changed hands because somebody new loves it and the library has an elevator that hums a little too loud but works like a blessing, I hope someone will say they saw us on a Tuesday, holding hands walking to the market, and they thought to themselves, I want something gentle like that. I hope they find it. I hope they find it sooner than we did. But if they don't, I hope they know it's never too late to lay a word down and pick up a better one. And if they ask me what the better word is, I'll tell them plainly, like a man from a small town who has learned not to waste anyone's time. Home.